and welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports Network. That's Tom Fornelli, that's Bud Elliott, I'm Chip Patterson, and we are so excited because we are just tick, counting down the days till the start of the college football season. We got week 0 action coming up on Saturday. Then starting next Thursday, that 5-day marathon that is week 1. And so it is time, one last time here in the preseason, to sort of get a sense of the landscape. And what better way to do it than with some tiers? All of us love to be able to sort things into boxes, to sort things into tiers. And the way that we have decided that we're going to go about this is really looking at expectations. Looking at the way that a fan base, the way that a team should be going into the 2025 season to think about, where they should end up at the end of the year. So in our tiers that we have decided and debated on, even just trying to put our tiers together, our tiers are tier number 1, the very, very top. Make the Final Four. This means you have made it to the national semifinals of the 12-team college football playoff. That means you've got a chip in a chair. You've got a real shot at the national title. We will have more than 4 teams in that top tier because otherwise, why would you even do the playoff? Okay, the next tier that we're going to have is going to be to make the quarterfinals or the second round. The idea here is that if you are good enough to make the playoff, maybe the expectation is you make the playoff and then win a game, or by the merit of a terrific regular season, you make it to the quarterfinals by getting one of those top 4 seeds. Then the final tier, the one that I do think will be the most robust, is the make the playoff tier. This tier is where we find programs that in terms of expectations, they are going into the season saying like, you know what? We think that we can make it and be one of those at-large bids. We might not be winning the conference championship, or in some cases, like the Big 12 or the Group of 6, you think you are a conference championship contender, so make the playoff. Again, make the Final Four, make the quarterfinals or the second round, and then make the playoff. And so after that lengthy explainer, I want to bring in our guys for them to illuminate you as well on the way they approached this. Bud, I know we've been talking about this for a couple days now, trying to hammer it down. What is sort of your guiding light, your North Star when it comes to placing these teams?
Sure, Chip. So I think what you got to look at here is like, what do these teams bring back? How much are they spending overall, rev share plus NIL? Does it feel like they're in a push all the chips in type thing, or maybe they're a program where they're always all in, right? Do they have a reasonable path to get there? Like, does that match up with reasonable expectations? For a lot of the teams that they're going to be on our list, they were in the Final Four last year, or maybe within a play or two away, maybe a couple teams that we expect to bounce back, to potentially make it. And I just think like, hey, would this team and would their fans and their staff and their administration and the people who invest in this program, like how angry would they be if you didn't make the Final Four? And I think that's kind of a really important guiding light here.
Reasonable expectations. But if you've not been paying attention to the news, Auburn is literally out there claiming national titles from over a century ago because a computer simulation tells them that they might have won it had that existed at the time. I don't care about reason. I've got vibes here. I've got coming into the season. If your program feels like it could get to the playoff, like this is a boom or bust. And I think there are a lot more teams out there who feel like they are playoff potential teams than maybe we do with our logic and our reason. Because after all, nobody would have had SMU and Indiana in the playoff last year, but both ended up there. So I think a lot of teams look at those examples and say, that can be us.
All right, well, let's start by placing some teams in tiers. All 3 of us submitted our lists to producer Mikey, who will help us as we place them. So let's start off with some mostly consensus decisions. We've got Ole Miss, Michigan, Louisville, Florida, Arizona State, and Kansas State, all making it into our consensus tier for make the playoff. Now, there's one team in particular I want to single out here because they have one of the toughest schedules in the country. They have a coach that's on the hot seat. Tom, in terms of the Florida Gators, how did you go about looking at reasonable or vibes-based expectation for this Gators team? Because their win total is 7.5. And while they might be one of the few teams in America who might have a shot at the playoff at 8-4, that is a lower win total than most of the teams we are discussing. How did you look at Florida in including them in this make the playoff tier?
I mean, you touched on the win total. It's at 7.5, but I think a lot of that has far more to do with the schedule that the Gators have to get through than the actual amount of talent on the roster, because it is a very talented team. They do have a quarterback in DJ Lagway, who, if he's capable of staying healthy and staying on the field, could prove to be the best quarterback in the country. And that's typically a pretty big advantage for any single program out there. So if you look at this squad, they have not had the kind of success that they've wanted in recent seasons. It's been tough. Billy Napier's on the hot seat because of it. But if it clicks, you're Florida. This is a team that has won national titles in the not so distant past. This is a team that, as an athletic department, looks at itself as a school that can compete both on the football field and on the basketball court, where they just won a national title. The goals are always high in Gainesville. So I think if you're Florida, even knowing that a lot has to go right for you to get there, the playoff is your goal. And honestly, for a lot of people in Gainesville, probably winning games is the goal in the playoff, but I think they'd be happy just getting there this year. It'd be a sign of improvement for sure.
But you have power rated this as a team that you say could even be closer to 10, right? They're number 15 in the polls. Was the talent a big part of your placement for Florida in this exercise?
Chip, absolutely. Florida did not bring back Billy Napier to go 7-5 or 8-4. Like, they brought him back because if you lost Napier, you were going to lose Lagway. And Lagway, like Tom said, if healthy, is in the very short list conversation for best quarterback in the country based on what he showed last year against Ole Miss and against LSU. So, yeah, look, if Florida is at full health, and that's a huge key of this, because right now, like, McCray's out, Banks is out, a bunch of the receivers are out, Lagway still has not scrimmaged. Like, there's a lot of ifs there. But if at full health, like, there's nobody that's a touchdown favorite over the Gators, right? Like their fastball is really good. So I think, yes, like, if they have that kind of ceiling, if you're that coaching staff, that fan base, that administration, of course you got to expect to make the playoff.
All right, so let's add Texas Tech and Utah to the mix as well. Two more consensus picks from our guys, which brings us to a spotlight on the Big 12. Bud, you've done a good job of being able to place the Big 12, rate it, and rank it accurately. Tom, I want to hear from you too on this one. Do you think that net could include two Big 12 teams that should make the playoff, or is every Big 12 team that we're talking about today really just looking at winning the Big 12 title?
So certainly there is a potential for two Big 12 teams to get in, but you're going to need some Big 12 wins in these early non-conference games. Otherwise, I don't think the conference has a real argument that it deserves more than one bid. Although I think the likelihood that somebody has 11 wins and somebody has 10 is actually fairly high if you model this out. Now, I think there are four teams that enter this year really expecting to win the Big 12 and thus expecting to make the playoff, right? Kansas State, Arizona State, the defending champ, Utah, which is actually the Vegas favorite right now in a lot of places, and then Texas Tech, which spent $500 million, not really, but quite a bit this offseason. So, like, if you're one of those four schools and you don't win the Big 12 this year, I think you're pretty disappointed.
Yeah, full disclosure here, when we were asked to put in these lists, I thought I would make Mikey's life miserable and just list the entire Big 12, because we're staring at a situation, Chip, where, if you win the Big 12, you're going to be in the college football playoff. It's hard to imagine you won't be one of the 5 highest rated conference champions. And every single school in the Big 12 probably feels like it has a shot to win the Big 12. But I think realistically, there's only, 12 teams of the 16 and they really have a chance. But as far as getting 2 in, like Bud said, I think it's within the realm of possibility. It's just you would need 2 teams to clearly separate from the pack. You would need to win your non-conference games, and you would need other schools in like the Big Ten and the SEC to suffer a few too many losses. And we would see situations like last year where a 2-loss SMU gets in over the 3-loss SEC team. So it's possible. I don't think it's likely. I think far more often than not, you're only going to see the Big 12 champion get in this year.
All right, so now we're going to go to the hot seat. This is live sports television. We are going to see if someone who is on the hot seat on the out or in will end up changing their mind. First hot seat position is going to be for Bud. So, Bud, Tom and I were both in on Texas A&M, USC, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. In the interest of time, pick one of those teams that you think was really interesting in terms of hearing our support for it and maybe what the argument would be for or against including them here.
Sure. Well, I think I know your argument for Oklahoma, so let's go ahead and save it. Let's do USC. So sell me on USC here, because I thought about it, but then Their guard did not win his appeal in court to be eligible this year. And remember, they lost their stud guard, Emmanuel Pregnon, to Oregon. So now I don't know what USC is going to do when it comes to blocking people. That has me pretty scared off of them. I want to hear y'all's pitch on USC here.
Tom?
I mean, for me, it's just simply that Lincoln Riley is their head coach, and you've seen Lincoln Riley get to the playoff multiple times while he was at Oklahoma. We saw this team in Riley's first season win 11 games when they had Caleb Williams at quarterback. And if they hit their peak, which, granted, it's a huge if. There's really no reason for any of us to expect it to happen. But I just think if you're the USC Trojans, you are what is considered to be one of the premier programs in college football. Your goal in this modern age, even now that you're in the Big Ten, should be playoff every single year, or else you're not really USC anymore. So I don't know if I think it's likely. Looking at that schedule, you see a lot of tough games on there. You know, you're on the road for Illinois, Notre Dame, Nebraska, and Oregon. That won't be fun. So like I said, I don't think the odds of it are high, but at its peak, with the talent that they have, if things click, this should be a team at minimum in the at-large discussion every single season.
Yeah, but just to piggyback on that, the standard is the standard. If you're going to go and raise money for new facilities, if you're going to go and hire new general manager, new player personnel, new strength and conditioning, if you are going to make investments claiming that USC is behind in terms of keeping up with the modern college football powers, well, then you have to go deliver the results that modern college football powers are delivering. So especially with that word expectations being used, I think that for USC, looking at this roster, I'm not ready to put them back up to the Pete Carroll days, but I am absolutely saying this should be a team that should expect, just like Florida is, to be able to go out there and compete for a college football playoff spot. All right.
I think that those are good arguments, honestly. Like that makes sense to me. And yeah, if you told USC fan, hey, 8-4, they're like, seriously? It's about time Lincoln does something out there. Without Caleb. Mm-hmm. So I get it. I think if you're that actually works with my logic too. So, okay.
All right. Let's look at Illinois, Indiana, and SMU, two teams that were Indiana and SMU, obviously in the college football playoff last year, Illinois, a 10-win team last year. I did not include them in the make the playoff, which is kind of bananas because they've already gotten one click on their playoff card. I'm willing to be wooed, Bud. Why don't you make your pitch right here?
Okay, so Indiana and SMU already made the playoff last year, and I think a lot of fans will tell you Indiana's probably a better roster this year than it was last year, especially if Mendoza for the Hoosiers, the quarterback they got from Cal, has anything to do with it. Like if he's actually as good as some of these draft guys say, that Indiana absolutely should expect to be in. You know, SMU, right, has a very good roster still, a very, very favorable schedule once again. If you take a look, I mean, where are the underdogs? Maybe at TCU, clearly at Clemson, maybe a home dog to Miami, but that's kind of coin flippy. You know, Louisville, if you're able to go 10-2 here, I think you still feel fairly good about your chances because you would have two pretty decent wins and maybe two competitive losses. Baylor would be a nice feather in your cap as well. And then I look at Illinois, if not now, when? Like you bring back almost your entire roster. You've got a quarterback who's old as heck. I mean, Tom will tell you more about him. But guys, like if you're an Illinois fan, it's got to kind of be like, this is the year. Let's go for it. Let's make that playoff. I think it's reasonable.
Yeah, Chip, I don't think you're being reasonable at all by not having Indiana and SMU on your list of playoff expectations because, like, they were in the playoff last year. And once you get there, it's not like you sit there and think, okay, that's cool. We can sit around for another decade and not worry about it. That's going to be their goal again this year. And just to kind of piggyback on what Bo was saying about Illinois, this team did win 10 games last year. Now, it was a surprise last season, and it wasn't truly in playoff consideration late in the year, despite having similar resumes to other SEC teams that were being considered. But you do get nearly every single player from that team back. And you can also argue that depth-wise, Illinois is probably at its most talented point in a very long time on that roster. The schedule does not have too many bet games where you look at it and say they've got no shot to win. So I think it would be very difficult for Illinois to go back-to-back with 10-win seasons just based on the history of the program. There's really no evidence to show they're capable of doing it. But based on what they did last year and everything that they have coming back, I think if you ask everybody in Champaign if they think that they can get to the playoff this year, they're going to say yes. They might be a little shaky about it, but they're going to say yes.
I am an easily bribed doorman at the club. Let them in. Come on, let's go. You have convinced me. You have slipped me the requisite bribe. We are good to go. Let's throw them on that tier as well. Well, you see a lot of big logos there on the screen. We're going to continue to slot these out. Who are the programs that should be expecting to be there at the very end of the college football playoff? Who might just be in the mix to make it and only win a game? Short stays, long stays, college football playoff longevity. We'll get into all that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network, making ourselves some tiers ahead of the 2025 college football season. Now, what you have seen so far is us filling out essentially our bottom tier, which we have described as make the playoff. All of those logos and those programs are ones that are going into the 2025 season where a fan base, a school, an expectation can say, you know what, we should be able to set the bar, the standard at going and making the college football playoff. Our next tiers that we will be filling out soon will be not just making the playoff, but advancing on at least a round into the quarterfinals. And then that top tier are going to be the teams that we think should be expecting to make it to the national semifinals and have a real shot at a national championship. But before we move on, we've got a couple teams that were right on the verge of making it into the lower tier and a couple of lower tier teams on the verge of moving up. So it's time to debate. Tom, let's get started with the Nebraska Cornhuskers. You had them in your make the playoff tier. Bud and I did not. It's a very interesting selection because the variance on Nebraska predictions is wide. They are showing up potentially as a college football playoff team in some expert picks across the country. What had you believing that that is a fair expectation?
You know, honestly, you two disappoint me because for the last few years, you've been telling me about how we needed to expand the college football playoff because, darn it, all these schools need to feel like they have a chance. Why wouldn't Nebraska and Missouri be two programs who feel like they have a chance? Looking at Nebraska, this is a program with national titles in its past. And yeah, maybe they're a little too stuck in that past when it comes to the modern times and they're still chasing it. But coming into this season, if we're talking about Indiana and Illinois being playoff contention teams out of the Big Ten and USC, how can we not talk about Nebraska? Nebraska's got a 5-star quarterback in Dylan Raiola coming back for his second year as a starter. They've brought in Dana Holgerson to run the offense, and we saw the kind of improvements that led to in that unit last season. Now they have question marks just like everybody else, but we've also seen with Matt Rule, he's rebuilt plenty of programs to where in that third season, they take huge leaps forward. So when I look at Nebraska again, I'm not sitting here thinking Nebraska will get to the playoff, but I could sit there and certainly think that Nebraska fans think that it's well within the realm of possibility for that program because it's Nebraska. So how can you not include them as a playoff considerate when we've got teams like Baylor in there, folks? Come on.
Tom, aren't you the one that had Baylor there?
I've got anybody from the Big 12, yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Big 12 is different.
I'm not anti-Nebraska. They were one of my last cuts on this list. I just don't know. Like last year, they were happy to make a bowl at Nebraska, and they lost an awful lot of impact players on defense. They lost defensive coordinator Tony White. I think if they made another step forward and won 8 games or 9 games, that they would feel pretty good. But I don't think Nebraska can get in with the quality of its schedule if they go 9-3. I think they have to go 10-2. Or 11-1. And so I don't really think that, like, if you're a Nebraska fan, are you really that upset if you go 9-3 this year? I think that's a real big step forward for this program. You do get Raiola coming back for another year, so you're not going to feel like you squandered Raiola there. Rule's not on the hot seat or anything like that, so you feel like you're still continuing to build and progress. I just have a hard time. Maybe Nebraska fans are just too nice, you know? But, like, I don't think there's a whole lot of them out there like, we have to make the playoff this year. Right? Maybe they do.
But they're not nice. They found me after our Big Ten win totals part 1, and they found my under on the Big Ten win totals part 1, and they are they're out for me. You know that corn.
Yeah, but they're not using curse words.
What?
They're not using curse words when they're yelling at you, though.
Yeah, but that corn has rage in it. You know, that's still an active ingredient. All right, but Tom, what about Missouri? Because you talk about strength of schedule. Missouri's strength of schedule does not leave a lot of opportunities for them to be able to, crash through with that big time win. There are a couple, no doubt. That's life in the SEC. So what has Eli Drinkwitz's squad hitting that spot for you?
Yeah, I mean, going back to what I was saying about Nebraska, this is not a team I think will make the college football playoff. In fact, when we did our SEC win totals, I was under on their 7.5 win total because of what they lost. But at the same time, this is a program that's won 10 games pretty frequently in recent years, and 10 wins seems to be the kind of, dividing line between college football playoff or high major bowl game. And I think if you're Mizzou and you look at that schedule, yes, a lot of questions, including at the quarterback spot. They lost one of their best offensive linemen in the draft. In fact, they lost both their tackles in the NFL draft. They're still going to have a very good defense. So I'll have questions about how many points this offense is capable of scoring. I look at that schedule, and if I'm a Mizzou fan and I've got my black and gold glasses on, man, we can make the playoff with this schedule and this team. We've got Eli Drinkwitz.
All right, Bud. He's back in the Alpha Nerd. We've got Nebraska and its championship pedigree. I'm only going to let one of these two into the club. You get to make the call. Nebraska or Missouri, who gets in for ladies' night here on the Tuesday?
I'm probably going to go in Nebraska. I just think now Missouri might be able to sneak by with just like pay no attention to the man behind the curtain and just chant SEC schedule, despite the fact that this is very debatably an SEC schedule. Let's be honest about this. This is weak sauce to the core. But I'm going to go ahead and go Nebraska here. I think with the quarterback that they have, I trust the offense a little bit more. Maybe the offense can carry the defense. But I think a 10-2 is a little more likely than Missouri going 10-2.
All right, so we have added Nebraska to the tier. All right, now a team that is already on the board in the make the playoff tier that actually had some support from me to even be included in being able to make the quarterfinals was the Ole Miss Rebels. And look, this is a team that has not even gotten a chance to play for an SEC championship since the title game was created in 1992. But I think that if you look at what happened last year, where they had two absolutely just mind-blowing losses compared to what their standard was. Of course, the game against Kentucky, but even 3 interceptions from Jackson Dart against Florida later in the year. Man, that team was really, really close to 10-2 and maybe even closer to 11-1. I understand that we are losing a Jackson Dart, losing Trey Harris, losing some really key and good players on the defensive side of the ball as well. But I'm a little bullish on Austin Simmons and what they have back. So I guess, Tom, I'll hear from you first. You of course had them in the make the playoff tier. Did they at all come to mind as a team that could also be expected to advance on to the second round?
No, not even in consideration for me in that second tier. I mean, this is Ole Miss we're talking about. Getting to the playoff, they went all in on the transfer portal last year with the goal of simply making the college football playoff. It's just something they haven't done to this point. So getting there for them would be a tremendous step. And they came up short. So now losing everything that they lost off of that team last year, coming in with the expectations, with a new starting quarterback, with a defense that's probably not going to be playing at the same level we saw last year, simply getting to the playoff, if you're Ole Miss, should be a successful season. Anything after that is cake.
Totally agree with Tom. Like if you model this out, they're probably like 10-1 to make the second round. I don't think fans should be expecting like, hey, a 10-1 shot is the expectation. I do think to make up for what happened last year when they missed it and their expectation was to make the playoff, I think there's some carryover expectation there. And if Austin Simmons is that dude, maybe he makes up for their line of scrimmage losses there in Oxford.
All right, Tom, you had Michigan up in that second level. Let's hear the argument there, and then Bud and I will make a call about whether we advance the Wolverines to the second round tier.
It's a pretty succinct argument. They won a national title 2 years ago. Now we're just going to pretend simply making the playoff is all they want to do?
All right, they won a national championship. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think that there's just too much lost here. There's too much that's understood among the fan base. But can you put a jetpack on the Wolverines, or are we going to leave them down in the low tier?
I can see the path, but I don't think the expectation is to take that path. I think if you make the playoff with true freshman Bryce Underwood as your quarterback, I think that most fans would be really satisfied with that. It shows that you are, back on the right track after backsliding so badly on offense last year. I mean, you're not going to make the playoff unless the offense is at least pretty good. I don't know if the expectation, though, is to actually win a game in the playoff or potentially win the Big Ten and get a bye. Now, next year, if that happens, yeah, the expectation is probably be in that Final Four.
Yeah, I was going to say that I would look at 3 years of Bryce Underwood because it's Michigan. You should absolutely be in one of these tiers. Year 1, Bryce Underwood, tier 1, year 2, tier 2, year 3, tier 3. You hope he wins you a national championship. So, all right, we'll leave Michigan in place. We'll leave Ole Miss in place. We've got things settled. That means we need to look to the second tier and the top tier. Big names on the board. Where are we going to slot them? Find out all that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network, as we continue to look at the college football landscape in terms of tiering out expectations for the 2025 season. Now, that bottom tier that you see right there, those are programs that are going into the year with an expectation of being able to go out there and make the playoff. But what if making it is not good enough? What if a participation trophy in the CFP is not going to make your fans happy? It's not going to make your boosters happy. No, we'd like to see you actually be able to advance if you're one of the at-larges, or maybe even make it to the quarterfinals via one of the top 4 seed buys. So that's where we're going to be looking right now. There was a unanimous selection for this tier, and that was the LSU Tigers. So Tom, why don't you take the lead on this one? LSU, where did you look at in terms of closer to the make the playoff tier, or maybe even closer to that, Final Four, compete for a national title tier?
This tier was very difficult for me because I do feel like for most programs, if you're a fan base or a program that thinks you can win one playoff game, you probably think you can win 2 and get to the Final Four. But I tried to blend that kind of expectation with what I think is a more reasonable, there goes that word again, expectation for the program. And if you're LSU, clearly you've got national titles in the recent history. You just won one in 2019 with Joe Burrow and what might have been one of the greatest college football teams of all time. But now you've got Brian Kelly entering his 5th season as the LSU head coach, and you have not really lived up to the expectations of when you brought him in from Notre Dame. Meanwhile, Notre Dame was playing for a title last year. So I think if you're LSU, realistically, you want to get to the playoff, but you also look at yourself as being a bit of a class above a lot of these other so-called playoff teams that are in the running, the at-large types if you don't win the SEC. You think we are a blue blood college football program, so we should be competing for an SEC title. And if you win the SEC, obviously you're going to get a first-round bye in all likelihood. In fact, you can lose the SEC championship game and still end up with a first-round bye. So at the end of the day, that's why I put LSU there, because I do feel like they look at themselves as a playoff team, but they also feel like they're a cut above everybody else, even if they can't really, if they don't realistically view themselves as a national title contender this year.
All right, make it real simple. If you're an LSU fan or an LSU booster, so Brian Kelly, you've had 4 years of Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier, so 4 years of probable first-round quarterbacks, guy who was the NFL Rookie of the Year at QB, and you have 0 playoff appearances and 0 playoff wins? What the heck we doing here, man? Like, seriously? What? Like, if not now, when? It's not like LSU's recruiting the quarterback position in high school well at all. Like, they're not. Like, this is kind of it. It's let's ride, or probably somebody else. They'll scrounge the money for that buyout. I don't think making the playoffs is enough for the Tigers, especially not with the number 1 transfer portal class. They took all that money they were going to give to Bryce Underwood, spend it on the transfer portal after he flipped to Michigan. I think they expect to get to the second round for sure.
All right, 2 teams that had a majority but not a consensus, one in either direction, the Oregon Ducks and the Miami Hurricanes. Now, we are going to place both of these teams up there in that second round quarterfinals tier right now. Let's start with Miami. Bud, first, what made you solidified in their position there? And then from Tom Fornelli, why you were maybe a little bit hesitant to place them up into that spot.
Sure. So for me, a lot of it is all these guys that Miami paid for out of high school are in their money year, right? Maui Noah's probably gone. Bain's probably gone. Like Messador, it's his last run. Like, there's so many guys, it's their last year. They paid up the $3 million plus for Carson Beck. It's kind of go time here, much like the Brian Kelly analysis. Mario, like no playoff appearances, no wins. This is that recruiting class. They're all draft eligible now. They got so much fanfare, and rightfully so. These are good players. It's time to take that roster and actually win some ball games with it. So I think if you're a Miami fan and you just make the playoff and you get bounced in round one, I think you're pretty ticked.
See, I was outvoted here. I did not have Miami in this tier. I had them in the prior tier because let's be real, folks. Miami's been in the ACC since 2004. How many times has it won the league? Never. The college football playoff has existed since 2014. How many times has Miami been a participant in that playoff? Never. Simply getting to the playoff would be a huge step forward for the Miami Hurricanes. Now, maybe they get that first round bye by winning the ACC, or maybe they just get there. I think either way, if you are a Miami Hurricanes fan and you make the college football playoff, 2025 was a resounding success.
So I hear you. I'm actually curious about why Oregon is being weighed down right now, because they were at this level last season and then had such a horrible ending. The game's over. 8 minutes into the Rose Bowl, you're just all of a sudden out of the college football playoff. And so I think that in terms of an expectation, I've got the Ducks as saying, no, I think the expectation is that you don't just get back to the quarterfinals, that you are, based on the way that you have invested, the way that you have recruited, and the way that Dan Lanning has been building this thing. I think the standard and the expectation, much like we talked about for some of the make the playoff teams at the bottom, I think the expectation is that you should be able to take it to the next step. You were 13-0. You were the number one team in the country. You were the Big Ten champs in year one in the league. So, Tom, am I just way too over my skis riding the motorcycle with puddles on this one? Or do you think that was Oregon a little bit of a fringe team to be able to have between that top tier and the middle tier, which is where you and Bud both had them and outvoted me?
No, I think your stance is perfectly reasonable considering what Oregon has put into its football program over the last few decades in order to get to the point where they are a team that's looked at as a national title contender every year. It's just, for me, my final decision putting them in this spot was last year, this was a veteran team who went into the transfer portal, brought in another veteran quarterback in Dillon Gabriel, knowing that they were entering the Big Ten, but they were entering the Big Ten with a roster very much capable of winning it, which they did. They went through the regular season undefeated. They earned a first-round bye, and more than anything, they were screwed over by a faulty playoff format that had them playing Ohio State in their first game instead of somebody else, which in this year's seeding they would have been. So I think you look at last year and their inability to win a game, I don't look at it as a failure. But now coming into this season, I think expectations have changed because so much of that veteran presence you had on the team is gone. Dillon Gabriel's gone. A lot of key players in the defense are gone. Evan Stewart, the guy you were expecting to be your number one wide receiver, was injured in this summer and is already out for the season. So I think realistically, if you're the Ducks, you probably can't go into this year thinking we're going to win the Big Ten again. They can, but I don't think that you're looking at them as a favorite. I think you would still lean Ohio State and Penn State first. So getting back to the playoff is a goal. And I do think that once you're there, winning a first round game, particularly if you get that game at home at Autzen Stadium, very much within the realm of possibility. If the Ducks host a playoff game and lose it, I think that would be a huge disappointment for them, especially considering what happened last year in the Rose Bowl.
Not much to add to what Tom said. I do think the one point to consider here, like he kind of mentioned, was how healthy that team was last year. They went out and got Derek Harmon in the transfer portal. The guy played 600 snaps of first-round quality defensive tackle. That's not a normal amount of health. That was a very healthy veteran Oregon team. They were ready to play every game down the stretch. Obviously, the unfortunate loss for them to Ohio State, to blow out there in the Rose Bowl. So many new pieces. Oregon's played a lot of their young guys on defense, but on offense, we have not seen Oregon use much of its young talent that it's signed out of high school. So to me, that's a total mystery. I've seen Ja'Cory Moore with my own eyes. That kid's a stud. I think he'll be really good day one. Who's the two? Who's the three at receiver? Do you scare anybody in the Big Ten with those guys? We don't really know what Dante Moore is going to be. So I have a lot of questions about the Oregon offense, and this team is much younger than it was. So for me, solidifying yourself as a serious contender and making the playoff yet again in your second year in the Big Ten would still be a pretty good accomplishment. And you get Dante back, so it's hey, let's load up, let's make another run. Unlike the two teams we just talked about, Miami and LSU, who are going to lose their quarterback to the NFL following this season.
What's left? Just big dogs only. We will look at the very top tier, the real national title contenders, and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. And now we have reached the final tier. And we have a couple of unanimous selections for the top tier. They are as follows: Texas, Georgia, Penn State, Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson. Now, Bud, I'm going to throw this to you first. Of these teams, or Notre Dame, actually go ahead and throw Notre Dame up there as well. We'll get to the Fighting Irish in just a little bit. Of these teams, Bud, who did you have the most difficulty in terms of being able to place them? For example, Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, Penn State, these are all teams that were playing at the top of the sport just last year. So who among that group did you have the most trouble with?
Yeah, Chip, really, for me, it's the last three there. I feel like they're in a slightly different category. Clemson is a lot of the media's darling this offseason. It's easy to see why. They have a lot of players who are rated really highly for the draft, and yet they lost 4 games last year, right? And they caught a bunch of ACC teams at a time when some of those ACC teams were collapsing. So I do think you want to see them play and beat a good team. So I guess I'll go with Clemson, although I think they demonstrated they are a really good football team, regardless of the 4 losses there. But I'll take Clemson.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same spot. Clemson was the only one that I personally was sitting there I don't know if I consider them a Final Four team, but I think Clemson considers itself a Final Four team, and everybody around that program, that fan base, and in that building looks at what they have coming back and looks at the rest of the ACC and thinks to itself, we should be the favorite to win this conference, and if we are, we should get a bye, which means we're only going to have to win 1 game to get to the semifinals. So I think that it's a realistic expectation for them, even if it's not one that I myself share.
Yeah, my thought on the Tigers is you build up for a year like this. When we use the word expectation to start this is 100% where expectation is going to play a role in Clemson leveling up, where just getting there is not going to be good enough. So that one was one that I definitely am going to show a little bit of my own biases by pushing them up to the front of the list here. I got to tell y'all, though, I had a little bit of trouble with Notre Dame. I actually had Notre Dame in my middle tier the first time out. And this is, again, a team that made it all the way to the national championship game a year ago. But they lose a lot off that team, specifically in some key spots. Riley Leonard, obviously, was the one that you're going to look at in terms of the responsibility he had, not only being able to provide a passing attack, but being the team's second leading rusher behind Jeremiah Love. Defensively, we lose some key players as well. And while overall, I am unbelievably impressed with the way that Marcus Freeman has built out the competitive depth with this Notre Dame program, that they sustained 6 season-ending injuries to starters throughout that national title run, and yet still were able to maintain the level of success. I do think that in terms of expectations, saying, okay, this is a team that should be able to get back all the way to the Final Four. It felt a little bit stiff for me, but I'm not going to put up a big fight against it. I was just the odd man out. Am I a Notre Dame hater? Is that it? Have I just found okay, all right, I'm a Notre Dame hater. I got it. Were you confident there, Bud?
Was I confident in Notre Dame making the Final Four? No, but I am confident that is the expectations of the program, right? From the staff to the fans to the players to the admin. I think they fully expect to be back. And they were in the national title game, last year, to your point. I think this quarterback decision is kind of surprising, honestly. For most of the offseason, we thought it would be Carr. If you look at Tim O'Malley of Irish Illustrated, did an awesome job covering the Notre Dame for us. He wrote this morning, February of 2025, if you had told him that Minchie was going to be the starter, this would be the greatest upset since Lazarus rose from the dead. All the way to August 10th. Wow, good for him. And his reaction on August 18th, which would have been, I kind of figured Kenny Minchie being named the starter. It seems like Minchie, according to a lot of sourced up people here, outplayed Carr in camp. And that was just yesterday. And now today, the decision for Notre Dame naming Carr the starter. You wonder what's going on there. Obviously, NIL it plays a decision in a lot of these decisions to name or plays a role in a lot of these decisions to name somebody a starter. So we'll see how short the leash here is on Carr and how much Minchie gets to play. It wouldn't shock me if the Irish go with a little bit of a 2-quarterback system early in the season.
My expectations aside, Chip, you live in North Carolina. Bud, you live in Florida. I'm in the Chicagoland area, which means anytime I step outside my door, I'm surrounded by hundreds of thousands of people who might not have gone to Notre Dame, but are wearing Notre Dame hats and jackets and shirts. And let me tell you, every single one of them thinks that this is a team that's going to get back to the national title game and should get back to the national title game. So it was not difficult at all for me to put them in this tier.
Listen, these ain't predictions. These are expectations. They don't always have to be fair, but I think we have done a darn good job sorting them out here. Our Cover 3 podcast, college football playoff expectation tiers. You see them right there. Texas, Georgia, Penn State, Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame up in the top tier, LSU, Oregon, and Miami in the next tier, which would be to make it to the quarterfinal round and then to make the playoffs. A whole gaggle of teams with stars in their eyes as we get set to start week 1 of the college football season. Well, coming up on the other side, Bud just mentioned it. We've got some breaking news about Notre Dame. We will address their quarterback decision and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Little bit of breaking news as Notre Dame has brought to a conclusion one of the biggest questions about the Fighting Irish. Who will be the next starting quarterback when the team takes the field on a Sunday night down against the Miami Hurricanes? It will be CJ Carr, who was in a battle with Kenny Minchie through the spring and the offseason and through fall camp. Tom, now that we've got this announcement, your surprise for a battle that has been very, very hotly contested, and what your thought is in terms of what Carr does for this offense.
I mean, I think a month ago, if you tell me CJ Carr is a starting quarterback for Notre Dame, I'm not surprised at all. It's the expected outcome, and I still think that was the expected outcome the entire offseason. It's just reading the tea leaves in recent weeks and the kind of the reports you were starting to hear from camp, it felt like Kenny Minchie was very much, on his heels if he hadn't actually surpassed him in this battle. And I think if you're Notre Dame right now, like, you really wish you weren't playing Miami on the road in your opener. You really wish you were playing Purdue or anybody else, because you're going into a situation where you've got a first-time starter at quarterback on the road against a really tough opponent. And honestly, you don't really feel like you're all that confident in the fact that he is your starter. So I do wonder if this is still a situation where they're naming a starter just to end that speculation heading into the season. So the next week isn't 1,000 questions about it, but you're still going to see Kenny Minchie probably getting some playing time, and this competition might not truly be over yet.
My immediate thought was, how much of this is NIL related? Right? If you in your offseason go to your donors and you say, hey, like, we got to pay up for this guy, it's a really bad look for the staff if the guy you asked them to pay up for isn't starting week 1, because it makes you look like you didn't evaluate your kid correctly. So I'm not saying that's the case here, but if you look across the country, the favorite who the team paid has won in every single quarterback battle. Now, what makes Notre Dame different is that I think almost all the sources out there were unanimous that Minchie was outplaying Carr this fall camp. So maybe they leaned a little more on what happened in the spring and over summer, larger track record. Who knows? But I agree with Tom. I think we probably will see both quarterbacks. And I don't think Carr stinks. I think he has some abilities. I just think Minchie was actually playing fairly well.
All you need is love. Jeremiah Love. That is the best quarterback skill you have. Hand the ball off to the best running back in the country and let him go do his thing. So we'll have much more on this on the Cover 3 podcast on Wednesday. Of course, you can come and join us every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Download and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.